are suing the Attala County School District for unlawfully strip searching students at McAdams High School for allegedly having vapes. The search found nothing. Well, those families say it's time for y'all to pay up. Keith French is the attorney for the families. Keith, glad to have you here. So 7 families here. At any point were these families called before these students were strip searched?
No, the families weren't called at all and forced. In fact, the children were not given a meaningful explanation for it at the time, and they were made to believe that they had no real choice. So they were coerced by the school officials involved and told either you submit yourself to the school search or you can endure a suspension. So after that, one by one, they forced each student to enter a room alone. They weren't exactly sure what was about to happen to them. But when they got there, they were forced to strip off their pants and undergarments, expose their intimate areas, including their genitals. They were told to bend over and squat while a school official subjected them to degrading and deeply intrusive searches. It stripped them not only of their privacy, but their dignity. But no contraband or weapons were found.
And when you say strip search, was it clothes off or were they stripped naked?
Their underwear were taken off. So their genitals were exposed when they were forced to bend over and squat.
So they were stripped as if they were prisoners. When people go to prison, they actually have them, they're naked and spread butt cheeks. That's what they did here?
That's right. That's right. Which really opens the door to this case about a broader issue. We don't have enough evidence to speak to motive in this case, but scenarios like this begs the question, when government officials encounter black children from low income backgrounds, do they see children first or do they see suspects?
This obviously is shocking, stunning. So what happened? After it happened, these kids came home, told family members what took place, and did they then reach out to the school district?
Not exactly. The kids were actually too humiliated and embarrassed to tell their parents. I mean, you can imagine being 16 or 17 years old, having to sit across from your parents and tell them, I went into the room with an adult and had to pull down my underwear. So they didn't tell them. There was only one student. The kids didn't discuss it amongst themselves. There was one student whose parents called us after we had a personal conversation with him. He went ahead and told us the truth. We didn't know whether the other students had been strip searched as well, but I can tell you this, that one of the parents actually went and had a meeting with some of the school officials, including the officer involved that conducted the strip search. And in a recording, he admitted to strip searching each and every one of the children.
Questions from the panel. First off, Teresa.
Yeah, one, I'm disgusted. Here's a question for you. So where are you at in the process? How is justice being rendered?
We filed a complaint in federal court. We're attempting to serve all of the defendants involved in this case. Some of them are being pretty evasive. But once that happens, a judge will issue a scheduling order, and then we can start to get some discovery and find out, why on earth would a school official do something like this? One of the things that people are missing about this case is that, the school official involved had a wand, and he is heard on this recording also stating that he could have used that wand. In fact, the wands are used exactly for this sort of scenario to check, the kids to see if they had anything on them. But he didn't do it. Instead, he took the extra leap to strip search them. And so we want to really find out, what's the reasoning about this. There's a broader context where black students in Mississippi face significantly disproportionate school discipline rates, especially compared to their white peers. Of course, they're suspended and expelled at far higher rates, but they're also disciplined at a much higher rate, and they receive much more severe punishment. Federal guidelines to address these disparities in school discipline actually came under President Barack Obama in his 2014 administration. Federal officials encouraged restorative justice practices that didn't criminalize students and push them to become, a school to prison statistic. But those rules were rolled back by President Donald Trump's administration. And somehow I feel like in discovery, we might find out that this might be a regular occurrence because the kids, at first didn't say anything about it.
Zabora.
So what really concerns me is I'm just wondering, at what point does a strip search move from being just a school discipline issue and become more of a violation of that child's constitutional rights, and even raise concerns about child abuse and thinking of sexual assault towards a child? And what legal protections do these minors and their families have in situations like these?
Yeah, well, when you read the facts of this case, it's not a large jump or to presume that there is something perverted about doing something like this with kids. But yeah, we absolutely that's what we filed our claims, our Fourth Amendment claims for unreasonable search and seizure, and 14th Amendment claims. School searches, they don't require a warrant or probable cause, but they have to be reasonable at the start and reasonable in scope. And the search can't be excessively intrusive when you consider the student's age, sex, and the alleged infraction. And keep in mind, these students said that they didn't have a vape. They were just in the bathroom and it was a transition between class periods. There's no real justification for this official to have crossed the line here. And there's plenty of precedent in the Supreme Court and the Fifth Circuit, which Mississippi is in, that says that, reasonable suspicion is not a blank check. The more invasive the search, the stronger and more specific the justification must be. There wasn't any exigent circumstances where there was someone thought a weapon was around or somebody could have been harmed. Nothing of the sort, but the officer did what he did. So that's what we're doing. We're filing a lawsuit based on the violation of their constitutional rights. The burden is not on the children to resist government authority. The burden is on the government officials who had to act lawfully before conducting an invasive search. Legally speaking, the children could have actually said, absolutely no, we don't want to be searched. But practically, these are children and the adults have the power in this scenario. So they felt like they didn't have a choice, especially when you're threatening them with suspension.
Mustafa?
I mean, this is just so messed up on so many levels. Mississippi has a long history. Everybody remembers the auction blocks, and they bring black people up on those auction blocks, and you be stripped down and have to show your genitalia and your teeth and all this other stuff. The question is, one is you answered about the sexual abuse sort of element of this. The other one is the mental health abuse, because when you go through a situation like this, I have a psychology background. It can be a lot of therapy that's needed to help you to understand that you still have value and that you're still a human. I'm curious what parts of those elements might come into this case.
Absolutely right. They're part of the damages. We've had some of the students, there were 9 students total. I represent 7 of them. We've had some students that, they're scared. They're dealing with a lot of anxiety. One of the students stopped going back to school because here's another big shocker. The officer and school officials involved were allowed to stay on campus for the remainder of the year. So these students were too scared to go to school. We have one student that went to school but was too scared to go to the bathroom and use the bathroom, so he had to call his parents so they can come pick him up. Couple of the students are on medication now. They're all receiving some sort of treatment. And we do know this. Students who are suspended, expelled, or otherwise kicked out of the classroom or receive some severe punishment, they're more likely to have anger issues and become disconnected from their classmates and the school environment. And then they're more likely to be disengaged from school. That's why these disparities with this sort of disciplinary framing against black children, especially from low income areas, are so important. to prevent and bring awareness to, because it's part of the school to prison pipeline. You know, they'll start missing out on learning time and likely have worse academic outcomes, including, you know, worse rates of graduation. So, of course, across the country, you know, we've debated the limits on government authority over children in schools, at borders, during police encounters. You know, regardless where somebody falls politically, there's a broad agreement, or it should be, on one principle, and that's that children should occupy, you know, very special constitutional and moral position, because they're uniquely vulnerable, and that's what the Constitution is meant for. It's supposed to protect those, the vulnerable children, just as much as those who are privileged.
All right, then. Well, keep us abreast, Keith, of what happens next. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.